Well, there you have it. It's Friday. I usually do a news update on Fridays, but today I'm actually going to talk about my response to the NPRM. I should say Pilot Institute's response to the NPRM. Now, it's been about a month and a half since this thing came out, and we were actually the first one to create a video to explain what was in the NPRM. Now, I printed the NPRM since, get a lot of notes in here and tabs and everything, but I went through this document. It became an 89-page document instead of a 319-page document. The FAA didn't really remove anything from what we had talked about in the video. They just basically condensed the format. They made the font smaller, but everything is still in this document. It's now 3 columns instead of being 1 column per page, but the content is the same. Now, I wanted to go through in detail through this whole thing and really read it and take notes, and also create a page where I can put these notes. I can help you read. It comes down to be about 20 pages. Read 20 pages instead of reading 319 pages. And so you'll find a document, pilotinstitute.com/NPRM. Everything I'm going to talk about in this video is also in there in text format in way more detail than I'm going to talk about in this video. But the goal of this video is basically to kind of tell you a comprehensive response to the 89-page document, and also give you a couple reminders. I'm going to tell you what you should think about before you submit your response to the NPRM. I'm going to tell you about the goal of remote ID, because I think this is something that's important to keep in mind when you write your comment. You need to understand what the FAA was thinking about when they created this monster. And then I'm going to talk about, obviously, the points that we're going to address in our response, and I'm going to give you 4 main things. I call them big picture item that are going to go into our response. Our response, we're going to respond to actually 17 different things in the NPRM, and what it comes down to is we have 4 different solutions that will go and help with these 17 different items. And then at the end, I'll give you a summary. So let's get started. So before we get into the nitty-gritty and the detail, I want to give you a few reminders. And the first one is, do not copy-paste your response. Do not go and find somebody else's response and copy-paste it. Because when you do that, well, your comment doesn't count as anything. Every copy-pasted answer in the NPRM, and sadly, there are a lot of comments that have been copy-pasted from the AMA, because that's what they told people to do, is going to count as 1 comment. So please don't do that. Create your own response. And it shouldn't be very, very long. If you want to just cover these main ticket items, then it should be pretty simple. Now, the second thing is, remember that the comments are public, so you should remain professional, especially if your name is attached to it, okay? And also, I want you to address anything that you see in the NPRM that you disagree with, whether it's the regulation that is being proposed, or if it's the basis that the FAA used to create the regulation. In this document, they're giving you a ton of information as to why they decided to go the way that they went. And sometimes it doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to cover some of these in my response, and I'll tell you in a minute what I'm talking about with this. But make sure that you don't only talk about the regulation, make sure you talk about the reason why the regulation is going to be. The next thing is, when you make a reply, if you're going to be using data or information, make sure you use reliable sources, okay? And if you have sources from the government, from response from studies that they've made, then this is even better. Also, remember to provide solutions. This is important. This is just not a complaining fest, okay? And this is a place where your comment can actually be used to propose a new solution. For every single thing, all 17 items that I have on my list, I'm going to have a solution for every single one of them. And this is, I think, really, really important. Take your time. You still have a little bit of time before this have to be submitted. So don't forget the deadline, but make sure that you go through all of this. You still have all of February. This is recorded about mid-January. So you still have a little bit of time. The last thing I want to talk about is make sure that you limit yourself to either 5,000 characters. That's the only limit that you have for submitting your comment if you're going to type it in the box. Or if you have more than 5,000 characters, I'm going to have more than that, you can submit it as a PDF, which is what I'm going to do, okay? And the last thing is, don't submit more than 1 comment. The FAA says in the NPRM that you should be only submitting 1 comment. Okay, let's talk about the goal of remote ID. Why did the FAA decide to do this? Well, they have 6 different reasons. And the first one is they want to maintain safety and efficiency of the airspace. This is a direct quote from the NPRM. And this is basically the raison d'etre of the FAA. This is why the FAA exists, safety and efficiency of the airspace. So when they create this, that's what they have in mind. The second thing is they want to be able to associate the UAS with their owners. If you think about this, the pilot is in one location, the drone is in another location. So now there is a disconnect between the two. The FAA wants to know where you are when you fly this thing so that they can come talk to you if you are busting an airspace or whatever it is, okay? So that's reason number 2. Reason number 3 is situational awareness. They want to know where drones are located so they have an idea of who's doing what, and also they say that if there's situational awareness, then people know that they're being watched, so they will be less likely to try to do something stupid, okay? Whether or not you agree with this, by the way, doesn't really matter. This is what the FAA says. At this stage, if you don't agree with it, then you're going to put it in your NPRM comment. Number 4, UTM, Unmanned Aircraft Systems Traffic Management. This is the equivalent of air traffic control, but for unmanned aircraft. Eventually, down the road, the FAA wants to be able to provide services to remote pilots and to hobbyists. So this is one way that they can do it, is by knowing where people are, hence remote ID. The next thing, number 5, is beyond line of sight operation. When UAS are going to be flying really far away from the operator, the FAA wants to know where the aircraft is and where the operator is. So this is another reason for remote ID. And the last one is number 6, and I'm going to go back to number 6 throughout my presentation, is national security. The FAA thinks that if we have remote ID, then they'll be able to find out if a UAS is a target, if it's something that they need to take down, or if it's just somebody else just flying their drone, flying around and just being unknowledgeable or stupid or whatever it is that they're trying to do, okay? So these are the 6 key points, the goal of remote ID. When you propose a solution for your issue, you need to keep those in mind because it is highly unlikely that the FAA is going to change some of these. Now, personally, I have a suggestion for them, especially regarding number 6, and I'm proposing a solution that still goes with the fact that we'll have national security, but not necessarily only with remote ID. Okay, so our points, like I said, I got 17 points that I want to talk about, and I'm going to go in order of importance because, well, they are bigger items, and then towards the bottom there are other items that I think need to be discussed with the FAA. Now, I thought about this for a while, and I thought about what my response should be, whether it should be very short and only talk about these important points, or whether it should be about everything. And I decided to go with everything because I think that it's important for the FAA to know and to get comments on all these issues that we have out there, not only the big ticket item, okay? You don't have to be this in detail with your response. And this is why I'm going in order of importance. You can decide to stop anytime with this video. It's probably going to be pretty long, but again, all the information that I have is available on pilotinstitute.com/NPRM. And if you go there, you'll see the list of all the items and everything I've talked about so far. And my intent at this stage is to give you facts, okay? I'm not trying to give you any kind of personal perspective on this. I'm trying to keep it as neutral as I can. And I want to give you the facts that are in the NPRM and my solution, what I think should be changed. So let's get started. Number 1, big ticket item right here, the requirement for internet for standard remote ID. If you watched the video before, if you've read the NPRM, you know that the FAA is requiring standard remote ID, which is one of the 2 forms of remote ID, to have connection to the internet. And there are several issues here. First, I'm going to talk about the problem. Second, I'm going to talk about the impact that this is going to have. And last, I'm going to give you my solution. And this is going to be for every single ticket item. So the impact is that we don't really know the amount of data that is going to be required to be transferred with this design, this system. And we don't know if your current data provider is going to be enough, if you're going to need to get a bigger data package, for example, which could be expensive. We also don't know if you'll be able to use the data from your phone or if the UAS in itself is going to have a data line. If that's the case, you need to have an additional line with your provider. I did a little bit of research. It looks like the cost is about $35 to $70 for an additional line per month if you want to go with your provider. And with Verizon, it's about $35 to add an additional data plan to my data package, which I don't want to do, quite frankly. Not something that I want to pay for every single month. And remember, this is only for one UAS. If you have several UAS in your fleet, you may have to multiply that by a certain number. So there is a lot of unknown right here, and the requirement for the internet has a lot of issues here. We're sharing a lot of information that's going to be kept in there for a long time, for 6 months, and there's a little bit of privacy issue. So our solution is pretty simple, and this solution, you're going to see it throughout the entire thing. The solution is, the FAA actually has the solution already. In the NPRM, they say that if there is no internet available on takeoff, then the UAS, a standard UAS, a standard remote ID UAS, would actually be able to only broadcast. Now, broadcast is a different technology. Broadcast is a radio frequency that sends the information to anybody that's around the aircraft that can receive the information, okay? Basically, the FAA is saying, well, if there is no internet, broadcast is good enough. Well, our point is, and this is actually what I call big picture number one, big picture item number one, if broadcast is good enough when there's no internet, then broadcast should be good enough all the time. There should be no requirement for the internet, which means that there also is no need for a USS. Now, the USS is the provider that's going to be between you and the FAA. The USS is going to be collecting the data that comes through the network, through the internet, and it's going to be sharing it with the FAA. The big downside with this is that you're going to have to pay the USS. You're going to have to pay a monthly fee. The FAA says it's going to cost around $2.50 per month. A lot of people don't think that's the case. They use actually the data from lens providers to come up with that number. It could be a lot more expensive than that. And there's a lot more issues with USS, and we'll talk about that in the future. But if you don't require internet connection, or network connection, I should say, then there's no more need for a USS. There's no more need for a monthly fee. This becomes a lot easier. All the elements that need to be sent to the FAA and to law enforcement can be sent through broadcast. Even better, most UAS today are capable of broadcasting this information already, so this would be a very easy way to implement this solution. If you need to add internet connection to the UAS, then we're talking about a whole brand new design, and this is not something that's going to be easy to implement. So big ticket item number one, forget about the internet, just get rid of it, use broadcast. Obviously, broadcast is good enough for the majority of the flight because the FAA says, well, if you don't have internet, just use broadcast, okay? Now, I want to mention something here that's kind of important. There's a big section in the NPRM where the FAA asks a whole bunch of people that are in the industry that know what they're talking about, and they actually ask about 70 different stakeholders to meet during the summer. And they said, here's your goal, is to give us information about remote ID and tell us what we should do with remote ID. So these people met and they came up with a list of suggestions. And the list of suggestions is in the NPRM. And these people were called ARC. And ARC is Aviation Rulemaking Committee. And the remote ID ARC met and basically came up with two different suggestion in terms of remote ID technology. And they said there should be a tier 1, and tier 1 should be required to either is the keyword, broadcast or network the information to the FAA. They didn't say both. Actually, they did say both, but that was tier number 2, and tier number 2 was a requirement for both the broadcast and the network. And they basically said that this should be only required for a certain type of operation when a waiver is required. For example, somebody requests beyond line of sight flights, then they should have a requirement for one of these. So the FAA, I think, kind of missed the mark right here. They read through the recommendation and they basically said, we're not going to do this. We're going to do whatever we want. So a lot of people feel blindsided that we're on the ARC, and that included actually very large manufacturers like DJI. And DJI came publicly and said the exact same thing, is, hey, we came up with a solution. We told you that if you don't go with this solution, this is going to be a mess. And right now we're in the middle of a mess. So That was item number 1. Item number 2, required internet connection for limited remote ID. The second design for remote ID, standard, the second design is limited remote ID, will require to have connection to the internet at all time during the entire flight, before takeoff, during the flight, and then up to landing. If there is no internet coverage, you can't fly, which means that any remote area, if you have a limited remote ID UAS, you won't be able to fly, okay? The impact is huge on this. There's a lot of areas around the country, and if you go to the blog post that we created, the article, you'll see the charts. I took the charts from the 3 main internet provider, and you find that basically there's a lot of areas that don't have coverage. And you know this, if you fly anywhere out there, I fly a lot in areas that don't have internet coverage. So this would be a major issue right here if you have a limited remote ID. This also would require a subscription to a USS. Again, a fee added to it. Our solution is pretty simple. Look back at what we had before. Big ticket item number 1, remove the requirement for network, only have drones that broadcast the information. It simplifies everything. There's only one type of remote ID. Instead of having a standard and a limited, you're down to only one. All right. Ticket item number 3. We have remote ID for amateur-built aircraft will be absolutely cost prohibitive to be built. Let me explain. The big problem is the FAA said if you assemble more than 50% of a UAS with parts that you purchase online, then this is going to be considered a amateur-built aircraft. You say, okay, so far so good, right? Yeah, except the fact that in this case, you don't have to comply with remote ID, but if you don't comply with remote ID, then you will be stuck flying at what's called a FAA, which is an FAA-approved location where anybody that doesn't have remote ID technology on their drone is going to have to fly, which means that in this case, you built your own drone, then perfect. You don't have to get remote ID, but you can only fly it where the FAA says you can fly it, which is not going to fly really with a lot of people. The FAA says if you want to add remote ID to your UAS, to your home built, then you can do it, except you're going to have to go through the paperwork to get that technology approved. And well, we'll find out later that this costs around $20,000 in order to do this. So not going to work. Not going to work for the FPV community, not going to work for the people that fly smaller home built aircraft. So the solution is very simple here, actually. It's also something that the ARC had recommended, and it's actually kind of hidden in there. There's only one tiny little section that you have to read. And if you want to read the full thing, again, go to the blog. But the ARC basically said, they suggested that any drone that is non-autonomous, which means that you cannot pre-program a flight between point A and point B. And they said that any kind of drones like this that is non-autonomous should basically be excluded from the rule and allowed to fly wherever they want. And I think this makes a lot of sense. If you think about the kind of drone that we have out there, you think about the people that are just kind of building their small drone and just flying in their backyard, is not ever going to be an issue with the airspace. So in this case, just let them fly. And this is kind of the big ticket item number 2 that we have. There should be an exemption for non-autonomous UAS, the ones that you can control. And the ARC recommended it. It's in the document, it's in the FAA document. In this case, allow them to fly within line of sight, allow them to fly in uncontrolled airspace. If they want to fly in controlled airspace, then have them submit a LANS request so you know who is flying. The data is available right here, which is what LANS was designed for, right, in the first place. There's no more need for a FAA, the FAA approved location, and this basically makes it way more affordable for home builders. Actually, it makes it so that home builders can survive and continue to do what they've been doing for a long time. The last very big ticket item with this solution is the fact that there's going to be a much higher compliance with remote ID. If we start blindsiding a whole side of the UAS community, FPV and the home builders, then this is never going to happen. Remote ID is going to be a major failure. So this is the big ticket item number 2 is have an exemption somewhere for non-autonomous UAS. Item number 4, somewhat related to item number 3, is the fact that home built are going to be restricted to the FAA, the FAA recognized identification area, and limited to line of sight. This is going to have a major effect. We've talked about this before. take a look at our solution, which is, again, big picture item number 2, which is an exemption for home-built UAS. So number 4, pretty simple, but this is kind of a separate ticket item because it's a separate location in the NPRM. Number 5, really important. This actually I debated putting as number 1, but I wanted to introduce the technology first. Number 5, the FAA is proposing that the location of the pilot be made available to the public. What kind of impact is this going to have? Well, you can guess it already. There's going to be a lot of confrontations. There is already a lot of confrontations. I have a list in the blog post where you can see all of the confrontations that were recorded online. I didn't have to search very long online to find videos of people either getting into altercation, a physical altercation in some cases, calling the cops when they didn't have to call the cops. So this is going to be a lot worse when people can find out where the person is located. We had people shooting at drones. What do you think is going to happen when somebody who's shooting at a drone can find out where the operator is located? Yeah, that's right. Nothing good is going to happen out of this. Also, people that have a lot of really expensive gear are going to be now a spot on a chart that thieves can go and find out. Imagine that you're flying, you may have a VO with you, whatever, you're concentrating on your activity, and then somebody knows where your $20,000 worth of gear is located. Now they can go and find you. So not good. Not only that, but the FAA never really talks about this in detail. There is a very few paragraph, and I have them in the blog post in detail. There's like 3 lines where the FAA says that this is going to happen, and they never talk about why. They never give a reason why the public should have information, should have access to the information. So the solution is pretty simple. This is big picture, big ticket item number 3 for us is don't share the location of the pilot with the public. There is no reason for that to happen. This was also, by the way, a recommendation from the ARC. They said that only certain information should be available to the public and then the rest should be available to the FAA. I don't mind if the FAA and law enforcement know where my location is. I just don't want the public to find out and then come and bug me about it or come with a gun because they don't like the fact that I'm flying my drone. So that's big picture item number 3. Something that you should definitely mention in your response. This is very, very important. Item number 6, no longer a free option to fly your UAS. Let's take a look at this because this is kind of this is not something that I've seen on other responses anywhere else. But think about it. You've got 3 options now. You can have a drone with standard remote ID. You can have a drone with limited remote ID, or you can fly at a FAA if you don't have remote ID. Standard remote ID requires a connection to a USS, which means that there's a fee involved right here. It also means that you are going to have to get an internet connection of some sort. Limited remote ID, you have to get a connection. You have to have a subscription with a USS. Both of these are paid. The last one is the FAA. Well, the FAAs are going to be located at community-based organizations, just like the EAA. Well, last I checked, the EAA is $75 a year to access their site, which means that there's no longer a free place for you to fly. Flying in your backyard, if you don't have remote ID, not going to happen, which means that, well, this is a pay-to-play kind of situation. This is not going to work. We have a simple solution, and we've already talked about this. Big ticket item number 1, big ticket item number 2. We have no more need for an internet connection. It removes the need for USS, it removes the need for a subscription, and allow FPVs to, or I shouldn't say FPVs, non-autonomous UAS to be flying out there without going to a FAA, in which case there's no need for the $75 a year for the EAA, okay? So, pretty simple. Again, all of these big picture solutions are going to come back over and over again because, well, that's what it comes down to. It's a very simple solution to fix these issues. Number 7. Number 7 had my head shake for quite a while when I was reading about this, was the sources that the FAA used in order to make a point. And I think they're flawed. They're highly flawed, actually. They cite a bunch of events, a bunch of incidents that are going to justify remote ID. And I do believe that remote ID will do good. I do believe that remote ID is the solution in the long run, but the sources that the FAA used is just outrageous. So the first one is, here's a direct sentence from the FAA NPRM. On average, 6 sightings of UAS conducting unauthorized operation are reported each day in the country, okay? Each day, there's 6 sightings of unauthorized use. The source? No source. The FAA did not cite anything. They just put this out here just like they made it up, all right? So not good, not good. You can't just say things without having a source of information with it. Next one, they reported that there were drones 10 miles from Newark a while back in 2019, and that shut down the operation at Newark. Well, if you click on the link that the FAA provided, they will tell you that the drones were actually not 10 miles, they were actually 20 miles, and they were at Teterboro, which is a completely different airport, a Class D airport. And not only that, but this airport is actually inland, which means that you are allowed to fly inland. There was no more detail about the fact that these drones were seen, again, 20 miles away from Newark, and they decided to shut down the approach, well, because there was an overreaction. There was never any sightings anywhere near Newark. There was also no information saying that there were actually drones in there. They were just supposed sightings. So, next thing, the FAA quotes the Gatwick incident. I've talked about the Gatwick incidents in my news update over and over and over again, and there's still no proof that this ever happened, okay? As a matter of fact, if you go to the article that the FAA quoted in the NPRM, it is an article that says that 2 people were arrested. Well, if you follow this story, the 2 people that were arrested were eventually released because they had no part into this. There were hundreds of journalists, law enforcement officers, security experts out there, and nobody was ever able to take a picture of any of these drones, okay? So this is what the FAA is using in their document. And I'm getting a little bit annoyed here, as you can tell, but this is the basis for the foundation of this document. Next, the FAA is talking about disruptions in Dubai, in Dublin, in Frankfurt, and saying that drones are costing millions of dollars every time that they are being sighted around the airport. Now, I'm not saying that this is not the case. It is expensive if people are doing this and they're flying in the airspace and they're shutting down the airspace. What I'm saying is there's no proof out there yet of any of these things happening. For the incident in Dubai, the FAA is quoting information from an interview. This is their basis, and this interview is with a CEO of a defense and aerospace contractor. This guy's job is to create solutions to prevent drones from going into the airspace. Do you think this is an unbiased source of information? I don't. I think that they're putting this out there. This person obviously has a need for drones to be doing bad things, and this is what the FAA is quoting. So, not good. The list kind of goes on. If you want to see more of these, you can go to the blog post. I have every single one of them with the link to the article and then actually to a link that counteracts that information. If you do a little bit more research, then the FAA would have found out that it doesn't work. So, solution in this case, the FAA needs to either remove the incorrect sources, provide better sources, or even provide some sources. Just like the very first statement they have in there, 6 unauthorized reports every day. Where's that data coming from? I want to see the report, and I want to see it from somebody who's not a tabloid in the UK, which is one of the sources that they quoted. All right, I'll stop with this one. Well, not really, because the next one is kind of related, number 8. Remote ID, I don't think, is the most effective method for national security. Now, remember earlier in the video, I talked about the 6 different ticket items that the FAA is trying to accomplish with remote ID, and the last one was national security. Here's the problem. Again, the FAA is quoting things that supposedly justify the regulation. Let's take a look at some of these. First off, every single thing that they've quoted in here would not have been prevented by remote ID, because we know that the bad guys do not follow regulation as it is, right? And they will basically continue to ignore the regulation. Doesn't matter how many TFRs you pile up, how many requirements you have for people to tell you where they are, they're just not going to do it. It's just like license plates. Do you think the good guys are using license plates that are registered to their names? More than likely not, right? So same thing here with remote ID. Now, flying a drone over a stadium, flying a drone for terrorist attack, flying a drone for assassination attempt. This is all things that have happened in the past, and this is what the FAA is saying is basically, well, remote ID is going to help with this. Well, it won't, because flying a drone over a stadium, there's already a TFR. You can't do that. Guess what? The people did it anyway. What is remote ID going to do in this case? It's going to help you identify who it is. What if the person doesn't want to do that and they don't fill out the information and they fly anyway? Well, then remote ID is useless in this case. So what is our solution? And this is the last big ticket item that I have, big picture item number 4, is the FAA needs to concentrate on anti-drone technology. Now, I reported, I think it was last week or the week before, on technology that is being used at Heathrow. Heathrow has this radar, it's called a holographic radar system that is going to look for drones in the airspace and find not only that, but the location of the pilot as well. This does not require remote ID. This does not require participation in the system. It basically just finds people if they're flying in the airspace, which is good, right? This is what we want. We want the bad actors to be found and taken care of before something happens. So this is the solution. This is the solution to national security, not having a system that relies on the operator to be a part of in order to be found, because we know these guys don't want to be found. So that's it. I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to go to big ticket item number 9. All right, so item number 9 is kind of a big deal. I had to read through this one several times because it's unclear. There's a very unclear path to retrofit for older aircraft. You have a Mavic 2 Pro right now. Well, the FAA says, if you look in the NPRM, they claim that 93% of commercial UAS will be able to retrofit very easily, and 20%, now only 20% of recreational UAS will be able to be retrofitted to remote ID. Here's an issue though, something that they don't really mention in here is the fact that the FAA is going to require a specific type of serial number, a specific format for serial number. The one thing they don't mention in the NPRM is the fact that that serial number currently doesn't exist in the drones that we have. I'm pointing right here because this is where my drone is located. My UAS currently doesn't meet a requirement for serial number. And there's no way around it right now in the regulation that says, well, if you have an old aircraft and it doesn't have the proper serial number, you'll be fine. That doesn't exist, okay? Not only that, but the second thing is the standards that are supposed to come out to help the manufacturers figure out remote ID are not expected to be available, and I'm going to read from the NPRM. It says, until year 2 of the analysis period. Now, I looked everywhere and I couldn't find what the analysis period means, but it basically says that it's going to be another 2 years. I don't know if it's 2 years from today, if it's 2 years from the day that this thing goes out, but even if it's 2 years from today, then we're 2 years down the road before anybody knows what the actual standard is going to be. So I hope I'm wrong with this, but just the serial number issue is going to be a major issue because your drone today does not meet that requirement. So we have a simple solution here. This is going to impact 80% of recreational UAS, by the way. 80% of the drones that are flying out there for fun will not have a way to be retrofitted. This is not good. Now, 93% of commercial fleets should be able to be retrofitted unless the FAA continues with that serial number thing. So our solution is to the FAA is drop the serial number requirement or grandfather older models into it, at which point then we can retrofit a whole bunch of them, okay? Item number 10. Are you guys still here? All right. Item number 10. This is kind of an issue. I read through this and I read several times because I couldn't really believe it. But essentially, the USS, and I know we've asked the FAA to get rid of the USS, but in the event that they don't, the USS may be allowed to basically discriminate based on the type of UAS that you fly. Let me explain. The FAA says that UAS manufacturers can become USS. Okay, DJI could become a USS provider. Okay, not bad in its own right. Hotel could become a USS provider. But the FAA also says that they could limit the kind of drone that has access to their UAS services. So in an imperfect world, we could have DJI saying only DJI UAS can go onto our services, our US services. And Hotel can say only Hotel drones can connect to our US services. Now you own an hotel and you own a DJI drone. Now you have to get access to 2 different service providers. This is not good, all right? This is not good for you, the customer. It's really good for the USS provider, but not for you. That $250 a month could transform into something else. I work for a university. University, we have a lot of different types of drones. This could also become an issue because now we could have to get a subscription for all the different US providers, okay? Not good. Another issue related to this is the manufacturers themselves could limit which USS, the UAS, that's a lot of S's, which USS the drone can connect to. So DJI could say, our DJI drone can only connect to DJI's USS services. All right, that is not good, okay? Solution, pretty simple. Refer to big ticket item number 1. Get rid of the network requirement. It gets rid of the USS requirement. Then we don't have to worry about any of this. Number 11. Number 11, again, related to the intranet. So if we get rid of the intranet, this is easy. But the FAA never really defines when the intranet is available. This is something that comes up in the regulation quite a bit in Part 89. Basically, they say, if the intranet is available, then you have to connect to it and you have to connect to a USS. Well, what if you have one bar? The intranet technically is available. You can't download, you can upload any information. Now you're going to be grounded because you have access to the intranet, theoretically, but there's no way to transfer any data because the data is not good enough, the connection is not good enough. So our solution, you guessed it, get rid of this requirement for intranet, and then everybody can move on, and then we can just broadcast the information. Okay. Item number 12. We're getting close to the end. Yay. Item number 12. The FAA expects that the paperwork is going to be expensive. And let me explain why. They basically said that in order to get your remote ID system approved by the FAA, it's going to take on average about 50 pages, a 50-page document to submit your findings, submit the testing that you've done, blah, 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 all the things that's required. They also say that each page is going to take about an average of 5 hours to write. Now you're right, that's 250 hours of work time to get this approved. They also say that they expect the average cost is going to be about $83 an hour in order to do this. If you do the math, this comes up to about $20,000 to create a remote ID system and get it approved by the FAA. I don't know about you, but I own a small business, and $20,000 is a lot of money. And I don't know that a lot of manufacturers, smaller manufacturers, will be able to afford that. And if they do, you know where the cost is going to go. That's right, to you, the customer. So in this case, we have a simple solution. You've heard it before. Big ticket item number 1, get rid of the network requirement, the internet requirement, which means that a much cheaper, much easier compliance to get most of the UAS out there approved and meet the requirement of remote ID. As a matter of fact, most of them do as it is. All right. So this would be a lot simpler. Again, takes us back to big ticket item number 1. Number 13, this is something that actually came up from some of the comments you guys made on the videos, and something I hadn't realized, I had to dig and find it later on into the NPRM, is the fact that kits and kit stores are basically going to die with this proposal. Let me explain. The FAA says that an amateur-built aircraft does not have to meet the requirement of remote ID. You say, okay, so far so good, kind of. They still have to fly out of FAA, so they won't be able to fly anywhere. But then also the FAA says that if you built a UAS from a kit, then you do not qualify to become an amateur-built aircraft, which means that in this case, you do have to meet the requirement for remote ID. And the way that you're going to meet the requirement for remote ID, they say that the builder, in this case, will have to submit the paperwork. They will have to meet the requirement of Appendix D, which is essentially saying that, well, the $20,000 we just talked about, you're going to be liable for doing this. You're going to be liable for doing the testing and the submission and all this. So doesn't look good. Not going to happen, obviously. So our solution kind of goes back to big ticket item number 2. Make an exemption for the home built, include the kits in there, and then everybody's happy. Everybody's going to be flying safely, and then and we'll sing Kumbaya after that. All right. 14, phasing out of the approval for the FRIAs. Now, I don't really understand the reasoning behind this because, again, this is going to mess up with so many different people. But here's the problem. The FAA says that once this goes into effect, there will be a period of 12 months for people to apply, for CBOs, community-based organizations, to apply to become a FRIA, to become an approved location where people can fly without remote ID. And they said after 12 months, that's it. We're going to stop the application. Nobody else can be added. We can only remove FRIAs from the list. This basically means that, let's say that you currently have a CBO that's located on the field and you get approval. If you want to move to a different location, you can't. not after 12 months, because you won't be able to submit a request to be approved again. The FAA eventually wants to phase out, and this is clear in black and white in the document. They want to phase out and get rid of FRIAs completely. Here's the impact. If they're going to phase out the FRIAs, eventually, if you don't have remote ID, you're not going to be able to fly anywhere at all. Anywhere at all. They also said in the document itself that the lifespan of a UAS, of an aircraft that is owned by a CBO member is about 10 years. They want to phase out the FRIAs way before 10 years, which means that if you have a UAS and you can't install remote ID on it, well, it won't be any good. It'll be a good paperweight. You won't be able to install remote ID. You won't be able to meet the requirements. You won't be able to fly at a FRIA because they don't exist anymore. What do you think is going to happen in this case? Well, people are going to disregard the rule, which is going to make remote ID a big failure. So not good. Solution, back to ticket item number 2, we have an exemption for home built, in which case there's no need for FRIAs. Everybody's happy. Number 15, this is not necessarily a problem. This is more a request from the FAA. They requested for comments, so I'm going to provide them a comment. The FAA is asking whether or not there should be current waivers that need to comply with remote ID early. Let me explain. Let's say that you have a waiver for night flying, okay? Daylight waiver. In this case, the FAA is asking whether or not, if you have a daylight waiver, you should be required to go with remote ID before the requirement comes up in 3 years once this is approved. And my answer is, without a clear path right now to get these old aircraft retrofitted, then no, this is a terrible idea, because you may require people that already have been approved to do something now go back and change the requirement and say, well, now you need remote ID. If your Mavic 2 Pro doesn't meet the requirement for flying into that airspace, then you're going to have to trash that and get a new one that has remote ID. So not a good idea. Now, if they can figure out this retrofit shenanigans with the serial number, then maybe there is room for early adopters. If you want to be an early adopter, if I can get this on my UAS, I'm happy to comply. And again, as we propose it, not with the internet connection shenanigans, then I'm happy to comply. And I think people that do comply should be giving some kind of preference. Now, I'm not 100% on this, quite frankly. I don't really care all that much. But getting waivers in this case, if you were to get a waiver to fly above the grid, maybe you go to the top of the line if you have remote ID available. Again, only if these requirements that we've talked about are met. The next one is coming from somebody actually from the class, a student from the Part 107 course that sent an email to me and said, hey, look at this thing. This is not my area of expertise, but I did read about it and it does make sense to me. Standard remote ID is going to require connections to the internet. I mean, actually, all remote ID, as proposed, would require connection to the internet before takeoff, and a connection to a USS. If you have internet available and you can't connect to the USS, then you're grounded. Well, what if there's a DDoS attack on all the USS, making them unavailable at the time of takeoff? You get it. The entire fleet nationwide, nobody can fly because all these services are not available. So this is something the FAA I don't think thought about. If there is a requirement for the internet again, then this could ground everyone eventually. So how do we fix it? Well, you've heard it 20 times already. I've talked about it. Let's get rid of this requirement for the internet. Then we don't have to worry about DDoS attack. Everything would be broadcasted via radio frequency. Last item, not the least. This is kind of, I wanted to keep it for the end because I wanted to make a case first and then explain why this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work because this will only work if the majority of the UAS operators and pilots out there are going to be on board with it. Okay? As it is right now, as proposed, 80% of the hobbyists would not be able to convert their current aircraft into remote ID. That takes 80% out of the hobbyist, and that's a lot of people if you think about it. That's going to take out all the FPV community, all the home-built community. You know what these people are going to do? Everything that they've been saying online right now, rightfully so, they're basically going to say, we're not going to do it. And guess what? The FAA does not have the manpower to do it, and law enforcement officers have a lot better things to do than to try to get people to comply with this regulation. So The bottom line is, if we don't get everybody involved, if we don't have a solution that works for everyone, this is going to be a major failure. What the FAA wanted to do with remote ID is going to turn out to be, well, a handful of people, probably commercial operator, because they're going to have to do it, are going to have to comply with this. Everybody else is going to disregard the information. So I want the FAA to keep that in mind, and I want you to put this in your response as well. I think this is very important. Everybody needs to be on board. Everybody needs to buy out, or else this isn't going to work. So this was it. This is the 17 items that I have. I know this was kind of long, but I want you to pick and choose whichever one you want. You don't have to pick all of them, but I think this is a really good start. Now, submit your comment. If you want to submit your comment, you go to the FAA website. Actually, it's regulation.gov, and you're going to find the item number. I'm going to put it right here because I don't remember it from the top of my head. Do not copy paste. Provide solutions and use a PDF if you're going to be doing more than 5,000 characters, spaces included, by the way, and then submit your comment. You have until March 2nd, which is a month and a half from today. A month and a half from today. There's still plenty of time. So take your time, craft this. I know this is going to take time, but I think this is important. The FAA needs to know. Last I checked, there was about 8,000 responses already. Unfortunately, a lot of these were copy-pasted from the EAA because they made the mistake of telling people to copy-paste. Do not copy-paste. Come up with your own information, okay? If you think I missed anything in here, critical, big, whatever, even if you disagree with what I say, please leave a comment either on this video or on the blog. And if you make a good case for it, I'll append and I'll amend the document that I made. I haven't submitted my comment yet. I will do it in a couple weeks. This has been draining. I'm not going to lie. This has been a lot of time spent, a lot of evenings and nights spent reading this document and making sense of it and trying to do, trying to give you guys some information. So again, if I missed anything, let me know. Be civil. We may not all agree on the solutions that I have, but I think if we get together and tell the FAA what's going on, hopefully they listen. They may not. Okay, I can't guarantee that they will. I can't guarantee they will look at your comment and say, oh yeah, this guy is making a lot of sense. But you know what? If we don't try, then we'll never know. So let's go ahead and submit this thing in here. Thanks for watching. This is a lot longer than usual. I know this. This is all I have. I'm going to stop talking, and hopefully I will get your comment, and then let's engage into a healthy conversation about this. Again, we had hundreds of comments last time on the previous video, and I look forward to talking with you guys again. This is it. Happy Friday, happy flying, everything else, and I'll see you guys next week.